Justin Marks, you have created this fantastic sci-fi thriller, Counterpart, airing on Stars. Talk us through the genesis of the show, first of all.
Well, thank you, first of all. No, Counterpart uh, came about as a convergence of a lot of ideas. One was I really wanted to do a kind of a classic Cold War style thriller, but I didn't want to do something historical. I wanted to set a story like this in the present day and to do a Berlin Wall thriller where the Berlin Wall was not this physical construct, but more of a metaphysical construct, a divide between two identical worlds that would allow us to explore uh, the idea of spying and the idea of secrets when it came to how do you keep secrets from another version of yourself who knows all of your own secrets? How do you begin to hide all of your little idiosyncrasies when you're just sort of totally exposed like that? So that was the early stages of it. You know, I grew up on John le Carre and Graham Greene, and really wanted to write a show that felt true to that spirit.
Yeah, I immediately started to think as I was watching the show, it obviously has a very distinctly European feel, and I wondered like what was the choice behind that? And I started to think about the spy genre. It's also quite dystopian. It's kind of present day, but not really. It's I don't want to give a lot away for people who haven't seen the show, but talk about the look and feel of the show, and about any particular choices you made that were very intentional for telling this story.
Yeah, it was very everything in the look and feel of this show is done on a very specific level of detail to achieve something that is very specific. Hopefully, what we were doing here is, you know, we wanted our side and the other side to have very different aesthetics, and we wanted those aesthetics not to be made from a formal choice like, oh, we'll do a sepia tone or only long lenses or only handheld or black and white in color, whatever, you know, choices may be. Instead, we wanted to shoot them in exactly the same way, but to make narrative differences in the world such that you would always have cues when watching a scene on the other side to know that it's on the other side. But sometimes it would not be a conscious process, hopefully, if we're doing our jobs with the audience. You know, for example, we don't use warm tungsten lights on the other side. We resort to LED cold lighting. We tend to stay away from warmer colors on the other side. It's specifically a kind of a melancholy that's driven from this idea that the other world had suffered a flu epidemic that they had then survived. So there are fewer people. There's less clutter. There aren't cigarettes over there. There are all these kinds of choices that we hope start to cue the audience into not being able to consciously identify the differences between the world, but to just say, I know that's the other side, and I can't tell you exactly why, but it's because I've been trained by the show to sort of understand it. And so that was, a very early choice. And then as we began to scout Berlin as our location, because allegorically it felt the most important to do this show as a show that is about East and West, where West is our world and East is the other side. We began to look at neighborhoods in Berlin that really felt like they satisfied that criterion. To be able to say, in our world, we want to skew more towards neighborhoods like Charlottenburg or Kreuzberg or Neukölln, these areas that are grungy and full of life, and sometimes have a little bit of buildings that weren't destroyed during the war, so they feel very old and classical. And then on the other side, we wanted to go more towards clean lines and contemporary architecture. We used Potsdamer plots a lot. We used the sort of government center for a lot of shots, and it's because all these buildings were built very often in the last 20 years, so it felt like a new Berlin being built on top of the old one, and that required us to sort of, our locations manager in Berlin, Lillian, is brilliant because she really does have to always be aware of the many, many rules we have for each world when trying to find which setting is most appropriate.
Yeah, and see what you just said is so good, because I was, as watching the show, I started to think to myself, like, I just got used to the idea of being in either world without understanding quite why that was. It just started to happen subconsciously, which is probably what you want to hear from viewers.
No, that's great. I'm so satisfied that that's.
The thing is, it's like, you know, the parallel dimensions and timelines has been done a lot in various TV shows and films. You know, in the other dimension, they wear silly costumes or they have a moustache and that kind of stuff. You don't do any of that. And I wonder if when you started making the series and before it aired, were you worried at all that you weren't kind of following the tropes of what alternate realities are supposed to be? Or were you just confident that the way that you guys were going to tackle it was going to come off well?
Well, I think we were worried to a certain extent. I think that, you know, for at least speaking for myself and for the writers, everything starts and ends with character for us. And we felt that we had a very complete beginning of a character journey in Howard and Howard Prime and the Emilys who we begin to meet in season 1, that felt like just ground the whole story from their points of view and it would still make sense. And so we started doing that. And then I think as we were doing that, we began to really only care about the tropes of the genre as they related to Howard's story. So it was less about at that than sort of looking to other parallel dimension stories and saying, what are the expectations? What are the moments? What are the things that we do? And more just saying, what if we just built a story about these two people who just happen to be the same person, or were once the same person, and then begin to covet each other's lives and compete with each other and form this Darwinian sense of competition with each other over the future trajectory of their lives. And so everything like that started to feel then that the narrative of the other side or the narrative of a parallel world, or I'm so, for some reason in our terminology as a popular culture, when we have parallel worlds, there's always sort of like a good version and an evil version, and I don't know where that happened or why we start to look at it that way. And look, I love it. I mean, it's the realm of comedy. I think Community did such a wonderful job with that, with the kind of evil Abed and good Abed, but it's comedy. When you're doing a real drama, there's no good and evil. There's just two miserable worlds, neither of which is perfect, and they're both trying some catharsis and failing to, even when being confronted by this other's version. So I guess all it is to say is that we kind of looked at the other side and the other Howard and the other world notion as something more akin to another country, another just, a Soviet Union to our United States in 1962. And that became the guiding point, and everything else just followed.
And also, it's important because we see the two Howards. So for JK Simmons, your show's leading man, he obviously had a lot of work to do to portray the different nuances of the different Howards, and they're quite different people. But what work went into making these two very distinct characters that he has to play?
Well, I think, and JK will probably have his own very specific answer about this. He's very much an inside-out kind of actor who's driven by understanding the biographies of each Howard and what made them different, contextually, circumstantially, and then what their psychological impact was. And so we always knew going in the exact moment or the exact relationship that split Howard from Howard Prime. And it's something that the second season is finally beginning to bring to the surface now, which is kind of fun. So JK was always working with that in mind. And so he started to think of that biographically, and then to start to kind of wear his skin in the way that someone would wear it if they had this narrative as opposed to that narrative, which is amazing to watch, because on any given day, and we were just here shooting on this set just an hour ago, we which Howard he is just by the way he walks and by the way he holds his mouth and the way he holds his face. And process-wise, that was very important to us, and it was very important to JK, that we didn't resort to a wig, that we didn't resort to a scar going down his face or an eye patch or a goatee or something else, but that he would just be able to find these two men based on the different histories that they had, which is not unlike the process that we use to find our worlds.
Yeah, and I think it's a testament to his talent as an actor that he really does pull it off. It's risky. It could not have worked, and it does, which is wonderful. What surprised me the most about this show, and maybe that's just because I wasn't quite looking for this I wasn't expecting it. I think it's aspirational to me, because what it says is, this is what you could be if the chips fall a certain way, and this is what you could be if something else happens. And you kind of touched on this already in this interview, but it's without giving a lot away, let's look at episode 2. Nadia is a violinist here, but she's a ruthless assassin over there. Yes. So talk us through that aspect of the show. Do you agree that there is an element of aspiration about how things happen to you and you are who you are because of things that have happened to you in the past?
I do, and obviously this is a show about nature and nurture, and the different aspects of it, and how much of our identity is coded by our nature, by our genetics, and puts us into a place where we have a certain template that we cannot escape. There is, we call it this destiny, right? This, which is really just another way of saying it's the trajectory that our identity is leading us in lives. And, the question is, does the nurture part of it affect that, change it, move us in a different direction? And how powerful is that? I happen to believe it's very powerful. I know there's probably hard science that might agree with me or disagree with me, but from a point of where we see the world and where we see the characters, Howard and Howard Prime, or Nadia and Baldwin, the violinist and the assassin, are all manifestations of the same idea, that with one choice different, or one circumstance different, or one little moment that happened to you, you could have gone down a very different path, which is something I believe fully. And I agree with you, and we do see it as aspirational in our minds, because a lot of it is just it goes back to and I think of the Incredible Hulk, and the ultimate appeal of the Incredible Hulk, when we think about it, is you wouldn't like to see me when I'm angry. What would it be like? We all sit there in traffic and we have our little moments, but man, what if I could not be Howard all the time and I could be Howard Prime instead? Isn't it possible? I know it's possible inside of me for that side of me to come out, and to see that and to witness that, and to have, in the first episode of the first season, to have Howard not be able to stand up to his brother-in-law, and to have his counterpart sort of step into his shoes and confront him in a more aggressive manner, is the thing. It's like his counterpart speaks to all the things he wish he could have said. But then, of course, he pays the price for those things too. So we really do. The first season, the big thematic question that we asked was, can you escape who you are? It's a phrase that Baldwin, first Nadia utters it in episode 2. She says, you cannot escape who you are. And then, as if in proof of that point, Baldwin says the exact same thing in the third episode. 2 different selves saying the exact same statement to prove the statement's resonance. Season 2, we definitely are starting to push the boundaries of that, which I think is what's gotten us, really fun, is now that these characters are all confronted with each other, maybe you can escape the template of your destiny. And those are the ideas that I think we love the most, is when we narrow it down to those thematic truths, the show really opens up to us.
Yeah. You and I are speaking because Counterpart is being discussed as one of the many shows in this era of peak TV that are up for Emmy consideration. The Emmys are being announced next month. And so that leads me to this. The show has been very well received. I had a look at some of the reviews last night, and it's really impressive. If it was my work, I'd be thrilled. And like anyone, no matter what you do, a pat on the back by your peers or by people who are judging what you do has got to be amazing. How have you felt about the way the show's been received by fans and by critics?
I think it's been, I won't dance around it. It's, this has been one of the sort of scariest professional experiences of my life. The last 3 years of going through what we've all gone through to put this show together. you always hear about it when people talk about process and people talk about, oh, you know, we really were lost in the middle of it and we had no idea if we were doing it right or, you know, where it was. And sometimes you just lose sense of what true north is. I felt that all the time through this process, and all of the my collaborators on the show can attest to just how many times we sat in the writer's room or we sat on set or we sat in post-production wondering if this was the right choice and what was guiding it. And it's so nice to feel like, I honestly, there were times when I wondered, is this show going to make any sense to anyone? And so it's so nice that in fact it does. And you know, and I think we have so many people within this creative collaboration to thank for it, but largely it's our cast who was able to sell the complexity of what the writers were going for on this show on a human level and just make it work, not because, yeah, the nicest thing that anyone has ever said to me is from time to time is, you know, there are times when I'm completely lost in it and yet I still care what's happening. And that I think is because of the actors, it's because of these characters, it's because spy plots are what spy plots are. They're arcane, they're, you know, they have these serpentine ways into each other. But if you care about the people in the middle of it, then you follow it and then you invest in it. So at the end of the day, I guess that's the thing that matters the most. But it definitely taught me the lesson of, it's actually true, the old cliche of like, sometimes you just have to believe in what you're all trying to achieve and not lose sight of that, because over 2 years of questions about on this world or that world or what the history is, let me tell you, you just find yourself doubting all of it. So it's cool. You know, I'm really happy that people are beginning to watch it and beginning to sort of tap into what the amazing cast and crew have done.
Yeah, well, hopefully the Emmy voters are taking notice. Justin, thanks a lot for your time today. Good luck.
Thank you so much. Thanks for talking.
And we're done.